What is going on, my broskiis? My name is Toadskii, back again, here to bring you guys yet another One Piece Treasure Cruise video. And this video I think is going to be really good for like beginner players or potentially like players that are returning to the game, especially due to the New Year's celebration. A lot of people are coming back to the game. You know, a lot of people come in, and the thing is there's a lot of things in Treasure Cruise. It's a very complex game, and the thing is that there's a really good resource, an official resource from Bandai themselves, that will help you in terms of getting around certain gimmicks in One Piece Treasure Cruise. So I want to bring your attention to this website right here. This is like their official news posting website. Typically, they have been posting, mainly the thing that we use this for is whenever they bring out a new character, they have like a full-on article about the unit, just giving us details about it, and they have it both in Japanese and in English. So this is the translated one. We'll go to Japanese, and if you scroll down a bit further, you have the English translations, where we get like a brief overview of what the character does. We did use this for the New Year's celebration, where they first posted it for the first time to kind of go through it. But this isn't the only type of information that you can find on this website. If you go over to the tips menu on this website, it will give you an article that tells you and breaks down every single gimmick in One Piece Treasure Cruise. And I think that this is a really good resource for players to kind of understand the kind of gimmicks that you should be expecting when you play the game. So of course they have the full Japanese list, and then they've got it translated to English. So we're going to go through this in today's video. Of course, I'll leave a link to this down below in the video description so you guys can check it out for yourselves. But let's go ahead and have a look here at what they have, because some of the descriptions and how they deal with each of these gimmicks, we'll see what they have officially. You know, this is posted by them. This was posted quite a while ago as well, and you know, I just wanted to bring it to you guys' attention because I know some people probably don't know what this is all about. Let's zoom in a little bit more so you guys can see what's going on. So you have the Despair, which is a very old debuff, one of the oldest debuffs in the game. Nullifies the target character's captain ability, can only be inflicted on your captains. So how to deal with this gimmick. You can choose a captain who has a captain ability that reduces the duration of Despair, which is actually quite common. Use a special that reduces the duration of Despair, or have a crewmate with an unlock power that provides Despair resistance, which is all pretty fair. I mean, there are other ways you can do it. You can use switch effects, you can use support abilities. You know, there's lots of ways to remove Despair because it is one of the oldest debuffs in the game. So yeah, very, very common. We have the Fear debuff, nullifies the target character's crewmate abilities, which is basically Despair but for crewmates. So their crewmate abilities are inactive, and the way to get around it is to have a crewmate with the potential ability of fear resistance, or use a special that removes it. This one is a little niche because there really aren't many characters that can remove fear duration with a special, so that's a bit of a weird one. Attack down, again, a pretty old debuff at this point, which just reduces your attack value. There are different levels of attack down. I'm not 100% sure, but if you like tap on the icon, tap and hold on the icon, it has a little pop-up. Sometimes for certain debuffs and buffs, it will show the multiplier of those effects. You know, sometimes you'll have an attack down that's only like a 50% attack down, which, you know, you can still kind of get through it, but most of the time when you're inflicted with it, especially in more modern content, the attack down is very severe and you need to find a way to get around it. So you can use a special that removes attack down, or a support character in your crew that has an effect to remove attack down, which is kind of strange that they actually list support effects for attack down when you can do the same thing for Despair, and especially like there are captains that also remove attack down as well. So yeah, bit of a weird one, but there are, again, multiple ways to remove it. The normal attacks only debuff, which is the weakened skill damage, non-normal attacks deal 1 damage. So yeah, pretty much what it means. So any like effect that you do that would normally deal damage, it gets reduced down to 1. Very, very annoying effect. The only way to get around it is to use a special that ignores this effect and deals damage. Of course, technically you can remove any of these debuffs by using like Shirahoshi Manchiri, for example. But again, it's a little bit niche in that scenario. Increased damage taken, which just increases the amount of damage that you take. And of course, there are multiple ways to get around that. We have the reduced chain multiplier growth rate. I feel like for new players, beginner players, you know, returning players, the whole chain stuff is very complex in terms of how it works. I mean, I know that there have been other content creators that have made videos in the past breaking down how chain works, and I feel like that might be a very interesting video to kind of explore, because the way chain works and the different buffs and debuffs that you can apply really are important to know, because, you know, for example, reduced chain multiplier growth rate, in a lot of circumstances, you don't even have to remove this debuff. You could just use a special like a lock chain multiplier special, and because it locks your chain, it just ignores the growth rate of your chain. If you have a chain lock, then it doesn't matter if you use chain additions or your chain gets lowered, your chain is locked at a set value. So you can just ignore this debuff altogether, depending on the situation and what type of characters you're using. But yeah, typically you don't worry about this debuff that much. Chain lock is very cool. There are both positive and negative debuffs for chain locks. Typically characters apply positive ones, but there are bad ones as well. We have attack down when you're below a certain chain multiplier, and there's one right below it here, which is when you're above a chain multiplier. So the icons look the same, but the one thing you have to take a look at is where the vertical line is. So this one is after the arrow, whereas this one is before the arrow. So basically this one here, you get the attack down when you're below a certain multiplier. So for example, if your chain is 2.0 or below, you have reduced damage. So basically once your chain gets above a 2.0, you go back to normal damage, but up until that point, all of your damage will be reduced by a certain percentage, and it's kind of the mirror of this one, where if, let's say like 2.0 in that case, where if your chain goes above 2.0, then you have severely reduced damage, but as long as you're below the 2.0 threshold, you do normal damage. So they're kind of mirroring each other. Very annoying debuffs, I will say. I hate the chain attack down debuffs. And this one here is binding ship ability, which is pretty self-explanatory, where it just nullifies your ship. This is a weird one as well, because there really aren't a lot of common ways to remove ship bind. There really isn't. There are some specials, again very rare, that can remove it, but there are also potential abilities, which is the most common way to get around it. Typically, in most cases, it's not a big deal. I know that there are some Grand Voyages where it is kind of important to have bind ship ability on characters, but in most cases you typically ignore it. It's not a very common debuff that you get inflicted with. So again, we have restriction actions. We got like more debuffs. There's so many different debuffs. We have bind, one of the oldest debuffs in the game, probably the oldest in the game. It just restricts you from performing any actions with this character. Again, there's lots of ways to deal with this. Paralysis, very annoying, but again, lots of ways to get around it. Basically, when you tap on a character that's paralyzed, there is a chance that the character will not perform an attack. In most cases, I think when it first came out, it was around a 50-50 chance that a character would perform an attack, but it's content based. You know, sometimes the content will be like a 90% chance or 99% chance to get paralyzed, 100% chance to be paralyzed, but there are lots of ways to remove paralysis. Lots of captains can remove it with their captain ability, support effects, switch abilities, lots of different ways, right? Blowaway, where a character is blown away for a certain amount of time. Sometimes there are permanent blowaways where if you don't see a number when a character is blown away, it just means the character's gone permanently. Typically, that will end your run in a lot of cases, but, you know, blowaway is very annoying. The stun debuff is also kind of a weird one. So the way that it works is it's kind of similar to bind in a way. So if a character is stunned, you can't perform any actions with them. And the only way to get around it is take damage in some fashion. You can also use, so let's say if stun is inflicted to like half of your crew, if the characters that are currently not stunned have a special that reduces your own HP, that does remove the stun. You can have support effects that trigger on the final stage. When you reach the final stage, reduce your HP by a certain percentage and then get some kind of effect. That will also remove the stun debuff. So those are the best ways typically to get around it. If you want to just tank damage from the opponent, you can do that, and that will remove the stun. But do note that if you are inflicted with stun, you actually do take more damage from the opponent during that time period, so do be careful. So the lock target effect, where you can only target one enemy on the enemy side of the field until that target is dead, then you can go ahead and target the other opponents. Switching of captains, very annoying mechanic as well, where if the enemy inflicts it to you, it's very annoying, where they will just pick one of your characters on your crew, switch it to the captain position. There are positive ones though, where you can activate specials that trigger it for yourself as well, so do keep that in mind. Now, silence is a weird one, because back when Treasure Cruise was, well, when it first came out, silence was like the translation that people would have normally for special bind. So special bind in-game is referring to, you know, you can't use your special for X amount of turns. Silence is a completely different effect. So basically, you cannot swipe up, you cannot swipe down, you can't tap on the unit for any type of effect. You can tap with them to attack, but you can't use any up or down flicking effects as it mentions here. And yeah, there aren't really many ways to get around it. There are a couple of characters that can remove it, but of course you could just be very careful in terms of the selection of your unit placement on your team, because usually silence is only inflicted to a couple of crewmates at a time, so do be careful about that. Now, there are no like icons for this one, but the removal of beneficial effects and the removal of accumulated values, there is a slight difference to these. So basically, if an enemy does like a huge like wave effect on the screen, it just removes all of your positive buffs. However, remove accumulated values does the same thing, but instead of just being a normal wave of removal, it actually is like a red wave, so it's like a more intense effect. And what it does is if you have a special that stores a value, like for example, like V2 Katakuri. If I got the yeah, I've got the database here. So if I just type in like Katakuri, for example, go to V2 Katakuri, it's just the first one that came to mind. So any special, it says deals 50 times the damage taken from enemies before the special is activated in typeless damage, and then you get adds 25 times the damage taken into tap timing bonus damage. So this is storing a value. Every time you take damage, it's storing it in the special, and then when you launch the special, it multiplies whatever damage multiplier is it that he's been storing by 50. Now, what this does is it removes the stored values in all your specials. So this effect can really ruin some units. So yeah, you just have to check what the gimmicks are. There are no real ways to avoid it, aside from like some of the Roger legends do have abilities to resist this effect one time during a quest. But again, doesn't really like it's a little bit niche. Tap-Impeding Gimmicks, so remove SFX, otherwise known as blindness in the community. So the SFX refers to like the words that are like going towards the center of the screen, like kaboom or like zap zap for like an electric effect like Eneru, for example. Those words are the SFX, and remove SFX is just removing them. So it's like you're literally just blinded. You can't see what you're tapping unless if you see the animation, you kind of like learn how things work. It's very, very annoying. So there you can use a crewmate ability to remove that. Some specials remove it, but again, it's a bit of a niche one. There aren't many characters that remove it via specials. Limit number of taps, so you can only use a certain number of taps during your attack. So normally you have 6 characters on a crew. This may limit it so you can only use 3 taps during a turn. So it means you can only attack with 3 of your units. A very, very annoying effect. So yeah, this one suggests that to use a special that locks your chain multiplier, which will mean that attacking with less units won't impede your chain multiplier, which is actually a pretty good suggestion, but it is a case-by-case basis. It is dependent on the content at hand, but this is a pretty good general way, I think, in order to get around it. And this is tap difficulty, which makes it more difficult to hit perfects, and it says nullify this effect by using a special that makes tap timing easier. I guess that's kind of true. Most people just ignore this anyway because it's usually not that big of a deal. So this one is referring to the Special-Impeding Gimmicks. So we talked about this before, but Special Bind, where you can't use your special for X amount of turns that it lists. So this is a really annoying debuff, also very, very old. So there are lots of ways to get around it though. You can use a crewmate that has a crewmate ability that reduces the duration of Special Bind, which is pretty common. Use a special that reduces Special Bind. Like, this is kind of a little bit weird though, because even though a character removes Special Bind by X number of turns, doesn't mean that they're a good candidate to remove Special Bind on your crew, because they need to have the crewmate ability that goes along with it that allows them to resist Special Bind on themselves. Some characters, it is crazy to think, there are some characters that remove Special Bind by, let's say, 6 turns, but don't have a crewmate ability to resist it by 6 turns. It's so frustrating when it happens. It doesn't happen that much these days, but back in the day, would happen quite a lot, and it would be very, very frustrating. There are captains that remove Special Bind as well, which is quite common. Special Reverse, a very annoying gimmick. So, you know, just reverses the amount of turns that are required in order to get a special to be used. So let's say, you know, you need like 10 turns to charge a special, you get your character maxed out, and then they special reverse you by 2 turns, meaning you need 2 additional turns of cooldown in order to use their special once more. Very, very annoying. So you can use a special that reduces your special charge time. You can have, again, this has to go hand in hand with a crewmate ability. You need to have a crewmate ability that resists special reverse as well. It is dependent, it's on a case-by-case basis, but you know, you really need to be very careful about special reverse, and it's very annoying when they inflict special bind and special reverse at the same time, which is why there are some characters in the game that resist both at the same time and help deal with both at the same time. Very valuable characters, such as like Alba, Legend Alba, such as characters like Karasu comes to mind, the quick Karasu, should I say. Strength King Rare Recruit is also pretty good for this as well. Lock special charge time. So this means that you need to tap a certain amount of in this example, you need to tap 6 perfects and then your specials will start to charge again. However, if you do have this debuff inflicted, and then you're hit with like a special reverse, for example, characters with captain abilities that have special reverse resistance will still enable you to charge your special. If you use a special that gives you cooldown, that still allows you to charge your special. This just prevents your cooldowns from being charged naturally by passing turns. So that's the only thing that this really stops. Typically, this one isn't that big of a deal unless if you're inflicted with it very early in the adventure. Typically not a problem. Limit number of special uses, again, a pretty annoying debuff, but doesn't come up too often. The best way around it is by using a potential ability as they list here. It says use special with effects that last multiple turns before the enemy inflicts the number of special uses. Also a very good way to do it. So let's say the enemy inflicts it so that you can only use like one special for the turn. So it means before you reach that final stage, if you have a special that grants you a bunch of buffs and then you carry that into that last room, meaning you don't have to use many specials to buff your multipliers, right? So it makes sense. Let's move on to the next one, which is damage over time. So these are debuffs that inflict damage to you. So there's burn and there's super burn. Both basically do the same thing, but the only real difference is when the damage is inflicted. So whenever you tap a perfect, it deals a certain value to your crew. However, with normal burn, the damage is inflicted at the end of the turn, meaning that, you know, you do your damage, the enemy does their damage to you, and then you take the burn. Super burn is different, where you take the damage as soon as you perform the perfect. So the difference here is if you're inflicted with normal burn, you can just straight up kill an enemy, and that's the end of the adventure, and then even if you would die from that burn, because you cleared the quest, that's it, you just win. Super burn, the fact that you take the damage as you're performing your attacks, means you can die in the middle of your attacks, which is really, really bad. So super burn sucks, normal burn is not that big of a deal. Poison, progressive poison, actually pretty annoying to get around, but again, there's lots of support effects, even like free-to-play units and characters that are very accessible in the Sugo Metal Exchange that you can attach to a lot of units that can just remove poison whenever you're inflicted with it, so it's typically not that bad. The bleed debuff is not very common, but it just reduces the amount of your HP each turn. It's not really that big of a deal, honestly. Not that bad. The pain debuff sucks. This one is really bad. Basically, anytime you perform any action in the game, whether it be a special, you switch with a dual unit, you perform a super type or an EX super, any type of action you perform does a fixed amount of damage to your team. So this can really put you on a clock, meaning that, if you've got like 10,000 HP left, and the pain is like 2,000 damage, you can only perform 5 more actions and then you die. So this can really put you on a clock in terms of how you can actually clear the content. And they suggest restore your crew's HP, which is what most people do, or clear with as few flicking actions as possible. Very, very true. But the pain debuff, man, there's not a lot of characters that remove it. Luckily, it doesn't come up too often. It's definitely more a modern debuff, but very, very annoying. And the hungry debuff. So the best way to get around this is through potential abilities, like, with tablets and dupes and stuff. When you're inflicted with it, it basically means that you will take damage every single turn, and this kind of works in the same vein as attack down. Where is it? Like attack down, right? Where it reduces your HP pretty significantly. Now, there are ways to get around it where you can have a potential ability with the hungry debuff, or you consume recovery or similar slots in the middle of your taps. So let's say the hungry is like 2 stacks. It has a number 2 on it, meaning you need to consume 2 recovery or 2 similar slots, and then it will just remove itself. So if you have a special that gives you a full board of recovery slots, as soon as you eat 2 recovery slots in the middle of your taps, the rest of your taps for that turn will just be fine. So it's a weird debuff for sure. I don't know why they brought it into the game. It's maybe it was like Big Mom related, I'm pretty sure. It's really, really dumb. So there are debuffs that prevent your healing as well. So we have Recovery Bind, which just literally nullifies your healing altogether. We have HP Recovery Down, which is just reduce the amount of HP you get from healing. We have RCV Down, which reduces the amount that you heal from recovery and similar slots. We have Convert Healing into Damage. So anytime you would heal from a special or whatever it is, then you take it as damage instead. And Converted Healing Slots into Damage is kind of the same thing, but instead of like from specials, any healing you get from a slot, from a recovery or a similar slot, is taken as damage instead. So all of these debuffs kinda suck. Recovery Bind is not that bad. HP Recovery Down, not that bad. Like, the only one that really does suck is Converted Healing into Damage, because a lot of teams will have auto healing sockets on their team, or if you're using the Hose ship, it gives you a lot of end of turn healing. all of that is converted into damage instead, and it can be pretty harsh depending on the content. So this is the only one I would say you really have to watch out for. The rest of them can be kind of fine depending on the content. This one can be pretty rough too if you have a character that generates lots of recovery slots or is able to consume recovery slots when you tap a perfect, because it will allow you to take damage instead. Slot-Impeding Gimmicks. So anything regarding slots. So we got slot bind, so it just literally prevents any slot from appearing for 9 turns, or in this example it's 9 turns. So there are potential abilities with using dupes or tablets to remove that, so that's not that big of a problem. Lock effects, so you can see that this slot has a number 2 on it, so it means for the next 2 turns, this character will have bomb slots permanently. But the thing is that if you have a special that just changes your slots around, you can just... So if the enemy, like, gives you a full board of block slots and locks them, you just change them into the block slots into matching, and then you get matching slots for, in this example, 2 turns. So that's really cool. That, like, you can make this a positive effect, which is not that bad. This one though, slot change impossible. This effect is interesting. Basically, whatever slot is in the slot when you activate a special that gives you slot change impossible, or whatever slot is available when the enemy inflicts it to you, is barriered, is put in a barrier. And basically, you have this slot permanently until you perform this certain tap timing. In this example, with Zoro, you need to tap 5 perfects to remove this effect. So this can be quite bad, but there are other positive ways that you can do it. Like, you can generate a full board of like rainbow slots or Wano slots, and then if the enemy inflicts it to you, you can just have those Wano slots permanently. So there's really cool ways you can abuse this to basically keep matching slots forever, but it is dependent on the content at hand. Automatic slot change. So this debuff, this icon, if you ever see it on your crew, it basically means certain slots will be automatically switched. So I know that, for example, like Odin, like V1 Odin, in his special, I believe it's like anytime you get a strength slot, he automatically converts it into a Wano slot. I believe that's what it is. Or it's something like that, or like any matching slots change into a strength slot and then it becomes a Wano slot. Either way, he abuses this mechanic. The appearance down effect, where I think these are actually supposed to be switched. I'm pretty sure this is appearance up and this is appearance down. I'm pretty sure. Either way, it basically will reduce or increase the chances of certain slots appearing. And then favorable or unfavorable slot transformation makes targeted slot favorable or unfavorable. The targeted slot is usually turned into an unfavorable slot. Yeah, that is typically what happens. So basically, in this example, recovery slots, if they appear, they will be counted as badly matching slots. This one really kind of sucks. If you have a special, though, that says for 3 turns or whatever it is, make certain slots beneficial, then if you activate that special before you're inflicted with this debuff will not be applied, because you can only have one instance of favorable or unfavorable slots. So that's kind of like the most ways that people get around this effect. Slot effect down. So this is typically on an opponent's side of the field, where if, in this example, if you tap with a strength slot against an opponent, then they will take considerably less damage. So you have to be careful. If you see this kind of icon, be very cautious, be very aware about what icon this actually is, to kind of determine what kind of slots you want to be using when you're trying to kill the opponent. This one is a very, very uncommon effect. So it says it makes irregular slots like block slots appear each turn. So normally block slots don't naturally appear. This will make them naturally appear. And then also you take damage at the end of each turn. This is a really weird effect. It doesn't come up very often. It's been used for like 1 arena. Maybe there's been a couple of Kizunas that have done it. It's a very uncommon effect. I would probably ignore this one. It doesn't come up too often. Slots with unfavorable effects. So while there is like strength, dex, quick sight, int, recovery, tandem, Wano, rainbow, whatever it is, any type of different slot, there are very weird ones here. So you see, you'll sometimes get a paralysis slot. Now this slot, when you tap on it, it basically will like paralyze the character when they attack. There is a way to get rid of it though. If you activate a special that removes paralysis, it will change this into matching. Now, there is a bit of a misconception, because if you activate a support that removes paralysis, that will also remove this. However, if you have a support that says, when you're inflicted with paralysis, remove it by 1 turn, let's say, that does not remove this, unless you're inflicted with this slot and the paralysis debuff at the same time. Then it will trigger and then remove them both. The only way you can remove this with a support is if the support says, if you activate a special, remove paralysis by X turns, then that would remove the paralysis slots. The same thing goes for poison slots. If you're inflicted with poison slots and the poison debuff at the same time, a support that removes poison that would trigger would actually change both of them and would change the poison slots into matching. But if you don't have poison inflicted during the time of poison slots, then you have to have a support that says, you know, whenever you use a special, remove poison. Then that would change it. Or if you just straight up have a special that says remove paralysis, changes it into matching. Or if you have a special that says remove poison, changes that into matching as well. As for bomb slots and super bomb slots, these are slots that I'm pretty sure they're counted as neutral slots. So they're counted as like having just a, you know, a neutral slot with regular damage. But these slots, if you tap with a miss, or if you tap with a good or a great, should I say, if you tap with good or great, it will deal damage to you, and Super Bomb basically just does more damage. The thing is, as well, as I believe Super Bomb slots are very similar to Rainbow Similar and Wano, where they cannot be changed by your effects or your opponent's effects, so be very careful about Super Bomb. Empty slots basically counts as having no slot effect there, which is, this doesn't happen very often, but it's interesting. Block slots basically give you half damage. That's basically what it is. These are some of the worst slots in the game, but there are lots of ways to get around block slots. Super block slots are just enhanced versions of these where they cannot be changed. They could not be changed by your opponent's effects, similar to Rainbow, Similar, and Wano. So the best way around this is to change your slots into non-manipulative slots like Rainbow, Similar, or Wano, lock them, and then move into the stage that would normally give you Super Block. That's the best way around that. And then, of course, there are debuffs or buffs on the enemy side of the field. It says attack damage reduced from certain slots. Okay, so I kind of misspoke about this one a bit earlier. Slot effect down reduces the slot effect of a certain slot. It's, yeah, basically, if you attack with a certain slot, you do less damage with that slot against the opponent. Resistance boost, so this can be both a positive and a negative, where if the enemy has this on their side of the field and they put it up, it means that, you know, they take less damage from certain classes, but you can also inflict this to the opponent where they take more damage from certain classes, so that's really cool. Resilience means that the enemy will always survive on 1 HP. There are ways to get around it though, so if you activate a special while they're at 1 HP, it will immediately do damage to them and kill them. This is just referring to normal attacks. So if you do attacks, your normal attacks, while they have this, then they will never die. If you have a way to do end of turn damage or final taps that do damage with their effect, that will allow you to bypass this and kill them. Defense up, it increases their defense. So I think this is kind of interesting to talk about as well, the defensive effects, because I think this may confuse some people. So if we have a character like, let's say, the one that comes to mind immediately is Carrot, right? If we have a look at Legend Carrot, well, we'll go to the 6+ version because the 6+ one's cooler. The 6+ Carrot here, where it says reduce the cooldown by 2, you give an attack boost, blah, 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 blah. For 12 turns at the start of the fight, boost chances of matching slots appearing, and attacks will ignore damage-reducing barriers and buffs. And I guess probably the one that would be the most common that most people would understand is this Gear 5 Luffy, where if you become the Gear 5 state, that attacks will ignore damage-reducing barriers and buffs, so your attacks go through defensive effects is what it means. What this means is it goes through damage reduction, it goes through nullification, it goes through this, barriers, and all the barriers as well, right? However, it does not go through defense up, because every character, every enemy in the game has like a flat defense value, and then what this does is it will enhance that defensive value. These effects that all these characters bypass are like damage reduction focused effects, whereas these effects are like upping the value of the character's defense. So this is the effect that characters typically do not go through. So you need to reduce their defense to 0 or use a special that removes the defense up buff on their side of the field. So again, this is just raising the flat number of a character's defense, and I believe the way that it works is that your number has to like supersede their defense number to actually start doing damage to them. So if they've got 1 million defense, I think you need to do over 1 million damage in order to starting to do damage to them. I'm not 100% sure exactly how it works mathematically, but it's something similar to that. So damage reduction is just straight up like if they've got like a 90% damage reduction shield, they take 90% less damage. Pretty simple, right? Lots of specials and captain abilities that can bypass that. Damage nullification just straight up means they take no damage at all. So again, there are some specials that can remove it. It's pretty hard to remove this though, which is why characters that bypass defensive effects is so good for these type of effects. This one is damage threshold, which is what people normally call it in the community, but in the game it is titled reduce damage over a certain amount. We just call it threshold, which means that once your damage reaches a certain number, the excess of that damage will be reduced significantly. So let's say the damage threshold is 5,000, meaning that you'll do 5,000 damage to the opponent, and then how much damage you would have done past 5,000 gets reduced by like 99% or something like that. So it's just like damage reduction with extra steps is the way I like to look at it. It's pretty annoying, but it is what it is. So damage limit means that you can only deal a certain amount of damage to the opponent during a turn. So if they've got like 10 million HP, but they've got a damage limit of 5 million, you can only do 5 million damage to them. So you have to kill them over 2 turns. There are characters that can bypass this via captain abilities, but it's very, very uncommon. This one here, percentage damage resistance. For specials with percent damage, reduces the damage taken by the enemy by 100%. So if you've got a health cutting special that does like a 30% health cut, it becomes 0. It's really annoying, this effect, but this is to bypass certain like gimmick teams that people would be able to come up with. And sometimes the enemy will have end of turn healing. So at the end of the turn, they will heal up a bit of their HP. So all of these things are quite annoying. But typically you don't remove this, you just kill the enemy and don't have to worry about it. We've still got a little bit more to go. We've got barriers. So barriers can be a bit annoying as well. Let's actually zoom in with this one because it might be hard to see. So with the Sentomaru here, you can see the barrier. It has a number 5 above it, meaning you have to hit him with 5 combo hits before you break the barrier. Every character has a combo number when you go to the character screen. This means that you need to hit him with 5 combo hits in order to break the barrier. The next one is tap timing. So this Kuma has a yellow P, meaning perfect. You need to hit 1 perfect, and then the barrier will be broken, and then you can start dealing damage to him. Pearl here, he has a slot barrier. So this is a strength slot. You need to hit him with 2 strength slots in order for the barrier to break. This is one of the most annoying ones to deal with because depending on team composition, this can be like really difficult to get through. And then there's a damage barrier, which basically just applies a secondary health bar. You need to like bypass that first amount of damage before you can actually start doing normal damage to the opponent. So the barriers, they can be very annoying, but again, characters like Carrot and Gear 5 Luffy, which we talked about before, they can bypass that, so it's not that big of a deal. And then there's other gimmicks. So immunity to status effects is something you'll see in just about every piece of content in the game. I say just about everything. A lot of content has it, where basically you cannot inflict certain debuffs to them. Sometimes the immunity to status effects will allow you to do certain ones. So if they've got an icon next to it, be very cautious about what it's saying. Sometimes you are allowed to inflict delay, but you can't inflict defense down or vice versa. It just depends. They're suggesting to just use a special that ignores immunity to status effects. That's completely valid, I guess. There is end of turn damage, so sometimes the enemy can do end of turn damage to you. So this one with the red skull, attack boost and turn interval reduced. So sometimes they have like a turn counter of 3, but sometimes they'll inflict this red skull, which puts their turn counter from 3 down to 1, for example, meaning they'll attack you more often. The counter debuff can be quite annoying too, it means that you need to, like, in order for it to trigger, they have to take a certain amount of damage or like a certain amount of turns have passed, and then they just reflect the amount of damage that they've taken back to you. So this can be really, really difficult. In most cases, it's not that big of a deal because you just kill them before it triggers anyway, but it can be a problem. Attack up, so it increases the enemy's attack value. And then there's intimidation. So intimidation is a relatively new one, where basically while they have it on their side of the field, it'll have an icon next to it in terms of what it's referring to. But if you activate like a certain buff on your side of the field, intimidation removes either a multiplier of that value or it removes a certain amount of turns from it. So for example, if the intimidation had like the attack up icon like this under it, it means if you activated attack up on your side of the field, it would remove a certain amount of turns from it or a certain amount of multiplier from it. So let's say you do like a 2 times attack boost for 2 turns. The intimidation might remove 2 turns of it. The intimidation might remove like a 1 times multiplier from it. It just depends on the situation. But intimidation can be very, very annoying. It mentions here using a versus effect. So versus effects are unaffected by intimidation. I actually didn't even know that. I guess it makes sense. Versus effect cannot be removed by the crew or your opponent's effects. I didn't actually realize that it kind of worked for intimidation as well. That's very interesting. Use a special whose effect lasts longer than the turns that have been reduced, which is pretty valid. So there are unique actions as well to wrap it up here. So the first one is special interruption. So if certain conditions are met during a quest, an effect will activate even if it's not the enemy's turn to attack. The conditions and effect will vary depending on the quest, which is true. Sometimes if you activate a slot changing special, the enemy will trigger an effect and then do something bad to you. So usually when you play a quest, the enemy will have speech bubbles that will kind of talk about what you should be expecting in the content, or if there is like a breakdown of the content beforehand, you can have a look and see what the interruptions ones are. And then sometimes the enemy will perform an action when they are defeated. So sometimes when they die, they'll perform an action where they do like a death hit to you, which can be very frustrating. Sometimes they just give you a bit of information about the quest. Sometimes they'll change your slots around. It is depending on the quest. But that is the breakdown of pretty much every major gimmick that you have to worry about in One Piece Treasure Cruise. Obviously, there is a lot to break down here, but I think this is really good for new players, returning players, beginning players, to like bookmark this page and come back to it just so you kind of understand what the debuffs are actually doing. And if you guys want like further breakdowns about each individual debuff in like more separate videos, we can definitely make a video in regards to that if you guys want to see that too. But that's going to wrap it up from me. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, make sure to go ahead and leave a like. And if you want to stay up to date with all the content I post, including more One Piece Treasure Cruise content, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. On that, guys, I'll see you guys within the next video.